I am Amanda, 33 years old, and for a long time I genuinely believed that losing my husband to my own best friend was the single greatest tragedy of my life. I was wrong. It turned out to be the ultimate blessing in disguise, the kind of ending that only later reveals itself as a beginning. Half a year after our brutal, drawn-out divorce, my ex-husband cornered me in the lobby of a high-end pediatric clinic. He sneered at me while holding a baby boy in his arms and announced, loudly enough for the entire waiting room to hear, that leaving a barren, useless woman like me had been his greatest victory. He bragged, chest puffed out, about his perfect new family with my former best friend standing right beside him. I just smiled, calm and unbothered, and asked him if he was absolutely 100% sure about that. 10 minutes later, a man walked through the clinic doors, and my ex-best friend dropped her baby bottle in sheer, unfiltered terror. Before I continue this story, let me know in the comments below where you're watching from. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had the pleasure of watching karma completely and utterly destroy someone who tried to ruin your life. The Seattle Pediatric Clinic was not the kind of place you went for a standard checkup. It was a fortress of concierge medicine built for the ultra-wealthy, the sort of establishment where appointments cost more than most people's monthly rent. The walls were painted a calming sage green. Soft instrumental music drifted down from hidden speakers embedded in the ceiling, and the air smelled faintly of expensive lavender sanitizer, the kind that costs 3 times as much as anything you'd find at a regular pharmacy. I was standing near the pristine marble reception desk, quietly reviewing a document on my phone, when a heavy hand clamped down on my shoulder. I turned around and immediately felt the air leave my lungs. It was Nate, my ex-husband. He was wearing his signature tailored navy suit, the exact one he always wore whenever he wanted to assert dominance in a high-stakes sales meeting. And standing right next to him, clutching his arm like a trophy she'd won at a county fair, was Amber, my former best friend. The woman who had slept in my guest room, eaten at my dinner table, laughed at my jokes, and quietly dismantled my marriage behind my back for who knows how long. Nate stepped directly into my personal space, deliberately blocking my path to the exit. His eyes swept over me with a mixture of pity and profound disgust, the same look he used to give waiters who brought him the wrong wine. "Well, well, well," he announced, his voice booming loud enough to make sure every other wealthy parent in the waiting area turned to look. "If it isn't my barren ex-wife, still haunting medical clinics. Amanda, I honestly thought you would have given up by now. You know, some women are just not built for motherhood. You should really accept your biological failures and move on." He shifted his weight, proudly puffing out his chest as he gestured toward Amber. She was holding a plump, cooing baby boy wrapped in a soft cashmere blanket. "My son," Nate declared, making absolutely sure the word echoed off the marble walls for maximum effect. "I am so lucky I finally found a real woman. Leaving you was the single best decision I ever made in my entire life. My seed is simply too strong to be wasted on a dead end." The waiting room grew completely silent. A woman reading a parenting magazine slowly lowered it, her eyes wide with shock. A father bouncing a toddler on his knee stopped mid-bounce and stared openly. Nate fed on all of it, on every uncomfortable glance and every whisper. He was a regional sales director, a man who survived on dominating a room and crushing his competition into dust. Right now, he viewed me as the ultimate defeated competitor, and he desperately wanted an audience for his victory lap. I did not flinch. I did not cry. My days of crying over Nate had ended the exact day I found his watch sitting on Amber's nightstand, 6 months ago. Instead, my eyes drifted down, slowly and deliberately, to the diaper bag slung casually over Amber's shoulder. It was a custom leather designer tote. $3,000, give or take. I knew the exact price down to the dollar, and I knew exactly how it had been paid for. During our divorce, Nate had meticulously drained our joint savings account, claiming terrible, unlucky stock market investments. In reality, he had funneled the cash directly to Amber so she could play the role of the rich, pampered new mother. As an independent forensic accountant, my entire career had been built on tracking hidden assets, dissecting corporate fraud, and exposing men who thought they were smarter than the paper trail they left behind. Nate always belittled my career, calling me nothing more than a glorified bookkeeper. He never once realized that marrying a fraud investigator was his first, and ultimately his final, mistake. I had seen every single lie buried in their shared ledger, and I had quietly, patiently bided my time. Now, staring at that stolen designer bag under the clinic's soft lighting, I felt a deep, chilling sense of satisfaction settle into my chest. Amber noticed my unwavering stare and smirked, dramatically adjusting the expensive bag on her shoulder as she leaned into Nate's side like some fragile, protected flower. "Oh, Amanda," Amber cooed, her voice dripping with venomous, fake sympathy. "Don't stare so hard. It's really not healthy to be this bitter. We truly didn't want to hurt you. You have to believe that. But Nate needed a real family. He needed a woman who could actually give him a child, not just endless expensive medical bills and empty, broken promises. You should really consider therapy for this little obsession you have with us. By the way, we're throwing a massive first birthday party for the baby next weekend at our brand new $2 million house. I would invite you, but I honestly think seeing true happiness up close might just break you completely." Amber stroked the baby's fine hair, flashing her perfectly manicured nails as she did. The diamond on her left ring finger caught the overhead clinic lights and threw a small burst of refracted light across the marble floor. It was a 2-carat princess cut, the exact cut and exact clarity I had saved, years ago, on my secret Pinterest board. She had not just stolen my husband. She had stolen the life I had carefully planned, the money I had personally earned, and the aesthetic I had painstakingly created. But she drastically, almost comically, lacked the intelligence required to maintain any of it. The sheer audacity of her words hung heavily in the sterile clinic air. A few nurses behind the reception desk exchanged deeply uncomfortable glances, clearly debating whether to call for security. Nate laughed, a harsh, grating sound I used to mistake for confidence back when I still loved him. "Let her be, Amber," he said loudly, wrapping a protective arm around her waist. "She's just jealous. It must absolutely kill her to see my superior genetics living on. Look at this boy. He's an absolute winner, just like his father." I looked closely at the baby. He was, genuinely, a beautiful child. But as I studied his tiny face a little more carefully, the corners of my mouth began to twitch upward, almost against my will. The baby had bright, piercing green eyes and a very distinct asymmetrical dimple on his left cheek whenever he babbled or fussed. Nate had dark brown eyes and a perfectly symmetrical, blocky jaw. I knew Nate's family genetics far better than he ever did, better than he probably ever would. I knew exactly, precisely, where those recessive green eyes and that lopsided little dimple came from. And it certainly, without a shadow of a doubt, was not from the arrogant man standing in front of me, puffing out his chest like a proud rooster in a barnyard. I slowly lifted my wrist and checked my Apple Watch. It read exactly 2:15 in the afternoon. Perfect timing, right on schedule. I looked back at Nate, my expression completely blank, utterly devoid of the hurt and devastation he so desperately wanted to feed on. "Are you absolutely certain about your strong seed, Nate?" I asked softly, my voice calm, analytical, and quietly deadly. Nate frowned, his arrogant smile faltering for just the briefest fraction of a second. What the hell is that supposed to mean? He snapped, taking an aggressive, threatening step forward. Before I could answer, the heavy automatic glass doors of the clinic slid open with a soft, mechanical hiss. I smiled warmly and stepped aside. I think you should ask him, I replied. Footsteps echoed across the polished lobby tile. A tall man with messy hair, bright green eyes, and a lopsided dimple walked directly toward us, unhurried, almost lazy in his confidence. Amber turned her head to see who had just walked in, and all the color instantly drained from her face, leaving her pale as a ghost. Her jaw dropped open, and the expensive glass baby bottle she'd been holding slipped from her trembling fingers, crashing onto the hard marble floor and shattering into 100 jagged, glittering pieces. The sharp sound of shattering glass echoed through the silent waiting room like a gunshot. Thick white formula splattered across Amber's designer suede shoes and the pristine marble floor, but she didn't even blink. She was completely paralyzed, staring wide-eyed at the man casually strolling toward us. Nate spun around, his arrogant posture instantly dissolving into absolute gaping confusion. His broad shoulders slumped as his brain visibly struggled to process the sight in front of him. "Ryan," he stammered, taking a hesitant step away from Amber. "What in the world are you doing here? You're supposed to be in Malibu. I just paid the $5,000 invoice for your luxury residential treatment facility yesterday afternoon. You cannot possibly be in Seattle right now." Ryan did not look like a man fresh out of an expensive coastal rehab center. He was wearing a faded vintage rock band t-shirt, ripped denim jeans, and a heavy leather jacket that smelled faintly of expensive cologne, layered over cheap decisions. He ran a hand through his messy, unstyled hair, and a lazy, arrogant grin spread across his face, perfectly highlighting that very distinct, asymmetrical dimple on his left cheek. He completely ignored his older brother's frantic questions. Instead, his bright green eyes locked directly, unmistakably, onto my former best friend. "Hey there, little sugar plum," Ryan drawled, his voice thick with an inappropriate, intimate familiarity that made the skin on my arms prickle. "Did you miss me? You suddenly stopped answering my texts right after the wire transfer cleared this morning." Amber let out a strangled, desperate gasp. She stumbled backward, her expensive heels slipping slightly on the spilled formula pooling across the marble. She clutched the baby so tightly against her chest that the infant let out a high-pitched, startled cry. "Ryan, shut up!" she hissed, her voice trembling violently as she darted her eyes nervously around the crowded clinic. "Just shut up and get out of here right now. Leave us alone." Nate looked back and forth, again and again, between the woman he'd thrown his marriage away for and his estranged younger brother. The thick veins in his neck began to bulge prominently against his stiff white shirt collar. "Sugar plum," Nate repeated, his voice dropping to a dangerous, gravelly whisper that still somehow carried easily across the quiet room. "Why the hell is my little brother calling you Sugar Plum, Amber? And why aren't you in California getting clean, Ryan? Who the hell signed you out of that facility?" I decided it was the perfect moment to offer some highly requested forensic analysis. I took a casual, measured step forward, clasping my hands neatly together in front of me. "You know, Nate, I always told you during our marriage that you needed to pay far more attention to the finer details," I said. "You're a senior regional sales director, after all. You're supposed to be incredibly observant. You claim to be a master at reading people in every situation." I pointed an unwavering finger directly at the crying baby clutched in Amber's trembling arms. "Have you ever actually looked at your son? I mean, really looked at him, objectively, without your ego getting in the way and blinding you completely?" Nate glared at me, his fists clenching tightly at his sides. "Keep your mouth shut, Amanda," he growled. "This is a private family matter. It has absolutely nothing to do with you anymore, not one thing." "Oh, but it does," I replied smoothly, my voice echoing loudly in the tense, brittle silence. Because you just spent the last 5 minutes aggressively humiliating me in public. You loudly bragged about your incredibly strong seed and your supposedly superior genetics to an entire room full of total strangers. But the math simply doesn't add up, Nate. Let's run the numbers together. Right here. You have dark brown eyes. Amber has dark brown eyes. Both of your parents have dark brown eyes. And yet, by some absolute biological miracle, your perfect little boy has bright, piercing green eyes, just like Ryan. The waiting room fell dead silent once again. A wealthy mother sitting nearby actually covered her mouth with one hand. The only sound left was the distressed crying of the baby and the nervous shuffling footsteps of the clinic reception staff, unsure whether to intervene. Amber shook her head frantically, tears finally spilling over her thick layer of mascara and leaving dark streaks down her pale, panicked cheeks. "It's a genetic mutation," Amber choked out, her voice pitching an octave higher than normal in sheer panic. "The pediatrician said it happens sometimes. It's a rare recessive trait. It can skip multiple generations." "Don't listen to her, Nate, please. She's just trying to poison your mind because she's a bitter, barren woman who wants to ruin our happiness. She's just jealous of everything we've built together." I let out a soft, genuine laugh that cut clean through her hysterical excuses. "A recessive trait skipping generations. That's a very creative and very desperate excuse, Amber. But let's look past the eye color for a second. Look at the jawline. Look at the shape of the chin. Look at that very distinct lopsided dimple on his left cheek every time he cries. That is not some random genetic mutation. That is a carbon copy of the man standing right in front of you. The man you've been secretly visiting every single time Nate went on his extended regional sales trips to Chicago and Dallas." Nate froze completely. The air itself seemed to get sucked entirely out of the room. He slowly turned his heavy head to look directly at Ryan. Ryan was not denying a single word I'd said. In fact, Ryan looked highly amused by the entire explosive situation. He casually crossed his arms over his chest, shifted his weight onto one leg, and gave his older brother a mocking two-finger salute. "She's not wrong, big bro," Ryan said with a careless, devastating shrug. "Although, for the official record, she definitely came onto me first. She claimed you were always too busy working to pay her any real attention in bed. And honestly, your money spends just as well at the luxury hotels in downtown Seattle as it does at the rehab center in Malibu." Nate's handsome face contorted into a twisted mask of pure, unadulterated rage. The realization hit him like a speeding freight train slamming into a wall. The $5,000 a month he thought he was paying for his brother's sobriety had actually been funding his own wife's secret affair, all along, right under his nose. He had literally, unknowingly, bankrolled his own spectacular betrayal. A guttural roar ripped from Nate's throat. It wasn't even a coherent word, just a primal sound of absolute fury and a shattered ego collapsing in real time. He lunged forward wildly, closing the short distance between himself and his brother in a fraction of a second. He pulled his right fist back, knuckles white with tension, aiming a devastating physical blow directly at Ryan's smiling, arrogant face. Several parents in the waiting room screamed aloud and scrambled out of the way, dragging strollers and toddlers with them. A receptionist frantically grabbed the desk telephone to call for hospital security. But before Nate's flying fist could connect with Ryan's jaw, a shrill, ear-piercing voice shattered the chaos. "Nathaniel David, stop this instantly!" The sheer commanding authority packed into that high-pitched voice made Nate freeze mid-swing, his chest heaving with exertion. Everyone in the lobby turned toward the clinic entrance. Marching forcefully through the sliding glass doors was a woman practically vibrating with self-righteous indignation. It was Nate's mother, Caroline. She was clutching a large, expensive boutique shopping bag stuffed full of designer baby toys, her heavily powdered face flushed red with unhinged anger. Caroline didn't look at Ryan. She didn't look at the shattered glass bottle scattered across the floor, or the crying infant in Amber's arms. Her furious, narrowed eyes locked instantly and exclusively onto me. She dropped the heavy shopping bag onto the marble tile with a loud thud, stomped directly into the center of the room, and raised her right hand high into the air, fully intending to slap the life right out of me. I did not even blink. As Caroline brought her heavily jeweled hand down toward my face, I simply raised my left arm and caught her wrist in midair. Her chunky diamond bracelets dug sharply into my palm, but my grip held like a steel vise. Caroline gasped in pure shock. She was thoroughly unaccustomed to any physical resistance. For 10 long years, she had treated me like an obedient, easily manipulated doormat. But the woman holding her arm right now was not her terrified daughter-in-law anymore. "Let go of me this instant, you absolute lunatic!" Caroline shrieked, struggling frantically to pull her arm back. I released her wrist with a sharp flick, causing her to stumble slightly into Nate. She quickly recovered her balance, her face contorting into an ugly mask of hatred. "You're a pathetic, obsessed stalker, Amanda," Caroline yelled, her voice vibrating with aggressive theatricality, clearly wanting everyone in the high-end medical facility to hear every word. "Did you actually follow my son here today? Have you been tracking his movements this whole time, just waiting for a chance to harass him? It's absolutely sickening. You need serious psychiatric help. You simply cannot accept the fact that Nate finally realized his own worth and left you in the dust. He traded up to a real woman." Caroline aggressively pointed a manicured finger at Amber, who was still trembling against the wall, clutching the crying baby. "Amber is the golden daughter-in-law I always deserved," Caroline proudly proclaimed, her chest heaving with every word. "She's kind, she's beautiful, and most importantly, she is whole. She gave me my precious grandson. She gave Nate the perfect family you could never provide because your body is broken and useless. You're just drowning in bitter jealousy because Amber is living the beautiful life you always thought you were entitled to." I glanced at Amber. The so-called golden daughter-in-law looked completely nauseated, her eyes darting nervously toward Ryan, who was casually leaning against a medical poster, highly entertained by his mother's deeply misinformed speech. "You're trespassing on our happiness for the last time," Caroline continued, her voice rising to a frantic crescendo. She aggressively shoved her hand into her oversized Hermes leather handbag and began rummaging around. A moment later, she pulled out a thick manila folder and forcefully yanked out a crisp, white legal document, thrusting the paper directly into my face and shaking it violently so the official-looking header was visible. "Do you see this, Amanda?" Caroline demanded, her eyes wide with a manic sense of triumph. "This is a legally binding restraining order. My attorney drafted it just yesterday. It details your obsessive, unhinged behavior over the last 6 months. It outlines your desperate attempts to destroy my son's sterling reputation. I have it right here, and if you do not walk out those sliding glass doors this very second, I am going to march up to that reception desk and have them dial 911. Caroline paused dramatically, letting her threat hang heavily in the tense, sanitized air of the clinic lobby. Several parents murmured quietly to one another, clearly alarmed by the mention of police and restraining orders. This was Caroline's signature move, honed over decades. She weaponized public humiliation to force her victims into quiet submission. She expected me to lower my head in shame, apologize profusely, and scurry away into the parking lot like a frightened mouse. She wanted so badly to be the hero who rescued her successful son and his perfect new wife from the crazy, barren ex-wife. "I will have you arrested right here, in front of all these respectable people," Caroline spat, taking another aggressive step forward and waving the document like a sword. "You'll be dragged out of here in cold steel handcuffs. Amanda, you'll be locked in a holding cell, and I will personally make sure the local news stations get the mugshot. Do you understand me? Get out of my sight. Get away from my family." I looked at the piece of paper trembling in her hand. My trained forensic accountant's eyes instantly scanned the formatting, the lack of a proper court seal, and the completely blank signature line at the bottom where a judge was supposed to sign. It was nothing more than an unfiled, meaningless draft, printed out from some cheap online template. It carried absolutely no legal weight whatsoever. It was just an expensive prop in Caroline's pathetic little theater production. I did not flinch. I did not take a single step backward. I just stood there, completely relaxed, a genuine smile of deep amusement slowly spreading across my face. Before I could even open my mouth to inform Caroline of her glaring legal error, a deep, impossibly smooth, and utterly authoritative voice echoed from the clinic entrance directly behind me. Filing a fraudulent legal document to publicly intimidate a key witness is a Class C felony in the state of Washington. Caroline froze. Nate visibly flinched. Even Ryan stopped smirking and stood up a little straighter, suddenly less amused. I calmly stepped to the side, allowing the man behind me to step fully into the confrontation. It was Jamal, my sister Megan's husband. Jamal was a high-powered corporate litigation attorney who specialized in dismantling arrogant people in federal court, one calm sentence at a time. He was an imposing, brilliantly intelligent man who commanded absolute respect the second he walked into any room, no exceptions. Today he was wearing a bespoke, perfectly tailored charcoal suit, a crisp white shirt, and a silk tie that probably cost more than Nate's monthly car payment. He held a sleek leather briefcase in his left hand, and his dark eyes were locked onto Caroline with the cold, calculating precision of a predator studying incredibly stupid prey. Jamal adjusted his gold cufflinks with agonizing slowness, taking his time on purpose. He took a confident step forward, completely towering over them. "And threatening police with a forged order is criminal extortion," he continued. "Dial 911, Caroline. I dare you. Go ahead and call them right now." Caroline's manicured hand froze midair, trembling slightly as her eyes locked onto Jamal. Her bravado evaporated instantly, like it had never existed at all. She recognized Jamal from the few agonizing family dinners where his sharp intellect had effortlessly dismantled her passive-aggressive remarks, one after another. But this was not a dining room table. This was a public arena. And Jamal was in full corporate litigation mode. Jamal did not wait for her to respond. He smoothly reached out and snatched the white document right out of Caroline's shaking fingers, holding it up to the harsh fluorescent lights of the clinic and scanning the text with a look of pure, unadulterated contempt. "This is an absolute embarrassment, Caroline," Jamal said, his voice carrying the calm, deadly cadence of a judge delivering a guilty verdict. "You printed a free template off the internet. There's no case number. There's no assigned court. There's no judge's signature. Presenting a forged legal instrument to compel a person's behavior is a Class C felony in the state of Washington. Furthermore, threatening to call law enforcement using said forged document constitutes criminal extortion in the second degree." Jamal stepped closer to Caroline. She instinctively shrank back, clutching her oversized designer handbag against her chest like a shield. "If you want to dial 911, I will gladly hand you my phone right now," Jamal continued, his dark eyes entirely devoid of mercy. "Because the moment those officers arrive, I will personally ensure you are arrested, processed, and placed in a holding cell. And trust me, Caroline, your expensive wrinkle cream will not save you during a county jail strip search." Caroline's jaw worked silently, opening and closing with nothing coming out. She looked like a fish suffocating on dry land. She looked frantically at Nate for backup, but Nate was too busy rubbing his throbbing forehead, the stress of Ryan's presence, and Jamal's sudden ambush clearly breaking him down piece by piece. With a swift, fluid motion, Jamal tore the fake restraining order straight down the middle and placed the two torn halves neatly into Caroline's empty, trembling hand. She looked down at the pieces of paper as if they were alien artifacts she couldn't quite make sense of. Her entire strategy, built on a lifetime of bullying and getting her way through loud, aggressive behavior, had just been completely dismantled by a man who never once needed to raise his voice. This was the fundamental problem with toxic families. They operated on the assumption that everyone else would simply surrender to avoid a public scene. But Jamal lived for the scene. He thrived in the conflict. He was a professional gladiator in a tailored suit, and Caroline was completely, hopelessly outmatched. "Take your trash and sit down before I make a phone call that ruins your entire retirement," he whispered coldly, leaning in just enough for the words to land. Caroline swallowed hard, her face draining of all its aggressive red color. She practically scurried backward, sinking heavily into one of the waiting room chairs, completely silenced for what felt like the first time in her life. Nate could not handle the sight of his mother being so easily humiliated. His entire identity was built on being the smartest, most dominant man in any room. Watching Jamal absolutely decimate his mother's poorly constructed lie triggered his deepest, rawest insecurities. He puffed his chest out again, stepping squarely between Jamal and me, trying to reclaim the rapidly deteriorating situation before it slipped away from him completely. "You think you're so smart with your fancy law degree, Jamal?" Nate spat, his voice loud and grating. "But you're just defending a total loser. Look at her. Look at Amanda. She has absolutely nothing. I took the best years of her life, and now she's standing in a pediatric clinic with no husband, no baby, and no future." Nate turned his venomous glare directly onto me. "You're pathetic, Amanda," he sneered, pointing an accusing finger at my face. "You're just bitter because I upgraded. Amber and I just closed on a $2 million mansion in Bellevue. It has 6 bedrooms, a custom nursery, and a view of the lake. I just pulled in a massive executive bonus this quarter. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, Amanda. Cash. Because I'm a winner. I close deals. I build empires." He gestured wildly toward Amber, who was still clutching the crying baby, trying very hard to look like the wealthy matriarch she so desperately wanted to be. "I have a beautiful, fertile wife who actually loves me," Nate continued, his voice echoing off the clinic walls for the whole room to hear. "I have a gorgeous son to carry on my legacy. I'm living the absolute American dream, and what do you have? Nothing. You audit spreadsheets for a living. You're going to die broke, miserable, and entirely alone in that tiny, depressing apartment of yours." He laughed maliciously, leaning closer to me as if trying to physically intimidate me with sheer presence alone. "You're nothing but a minor roadblock I finally removed from my path to greatness. My new life is spectacular. Amber is twice the woman you ever were. She knows how to treat a real man. She knows how to build a home. You just obsessed over your career and your bank accounts, while your biological clock ticked all the way down to 0. Now you have nothing to show for your entire life." Nate crossed his arms, a smug, self-satisfied grin finally returning to his handsome face. He truly, genuinely believed his wealth and his supposed biological triumph were the ultimate shields against any and all criticism. He believed he had won the divorce, won the breakup, and won life itself, all in one clean sweep. He stood there practically begging for me to break down in tears, to scream at him, to validate his massive ego by showing him exactly how much his words hurt. I did not give him the satisfaction. I just looked at him with an expression of profound, weary boredom. The same look I give an intern when they've incorrectly filed a tax return for the 3rd time that week. Jamal let out a deep, rich chuckle that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. He slowly shook his head, looking at Nate with an expression that bordered somewhere between amusement and genuine pity. He adjusted his gold tie clip, making sure it caught the hospital's overhead light perfectly, almost theatrically. "You know, Nate," Jamal said conversationally, completely ignoring the childish insults as though they'd never been spoken. "You talk a very big game about your perfect genetics and your beautiful new reality. But the funny thing about the American dream is that it usually requires you to actually own the things you're bragging about. And it certainly requires you to be living in reality in the first place." Jamal reached inside his sleek leather briefcase. He bypassed the thick legal files stacked neatly inside and pulled out a bright red, tightly sealed medical envelope. It had the distinct, unmistakable logo of the Seattle Reproductive Medicine Institute stamped in bold black letters across the front, catching the light just as clearly as everything else Jamal did on purpose. "Speaking of biology and dreams," Jamal said smoothly, extending the envelope toward me with the kind of calm precision that made grown executives nervous. "I believe it's time to give the regional sales director his quarterly performance review." I took the crimson envelope from Jamal's steady hand. The paper felt unnaturally heavy in my palm, as though every ounce of it had been soaked in 3 long years of lies, of quiet gaslighting, of nights spent swallowing my own suffering so no one else would have to see it. I ran my thumb slowly across the seal, and then I lifted my eyes until they locked onto Nate's face. Whatever trace of amusement had been lingering in my expression a moment ago was gone now, wiped clean. I studied him with a flat, cold gaze, the kind that gives nothing away. "Let's see how strong your seed really is." I tore the envelope open. The sound of ripping paper was the only noise in the entire clinic lobby, sharp, final, almost violent in the silence. I pulled out a thick stack of medical records, printed on official hospital letterhead, dated exactly 3 years earlier, signed and authorized by the chief fertility specialist at the Seattle Reproductive Medicine Institute. I lifted the first page so Nate could see, unmistakably, the blue ink of the doctor's signature. "You love talking about your superior genetics, Nate." My voice came out level, unforgiving, each word landing like a dropped stone. "You love telling everyone how broken and useless my body supposedly is. You stood in this very room today and bragged about your incredibly strong seed. But the truth always lives in the paperwork. And the paperwork says, you are a biological dead end." I read aloud from the official diagnosis summary, my voice never wavering. "Patient Nathaniel David suffers from severe, permanent, non-obstructive azoospermia, most likely resulting from complications of a serious childhood infection. 0 sperm count. Irreversible infertility." Nate stared at the paper in my hands as if it were a coiled, venomous snake about to strike. The color drained from his face in real time, leaving behind a sickly, ashen gray. His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again, words rising and dying somewhere in his throat, refusing to form. "That is a complete lie!" Caroline suddenly shrieked from her chair, though she made no attempt to stand this time, as if some part of her already understood the ground beneath her had shifted. "My son is perfectly healthy. You forged those documents, just like you forged that fake restraining order." Jamal took a single step forward, his frame seeming to grow taller as he loomed over Caroline once more. "These are legally subpoenaed medical records, pulled directly from the clinic's own database. Caroline, if you accuse a federal forensic auditor of forging medical documents, I will add defamation to the growing list of lawsuits I'm preparing against you. Sit down and be quiet." Caroline shrank back into her chair, thoroughly defeated, all her bravado draining out of her at once. I turned my attention back to my ex-husband. Nate looked like a man who was slowly suffocating, gasping for air that wouldn't come. "You knew, Nate," I said, closing the distance between us so he had nowhere to look but at me. "You knew 3 years ago that you were the reason we couldn't conceive. The doctor sat us both down and told you, in plain words, that you would never biologically father a child. You cried the entire drive home. You were so devastated, so terrified the world might find out you weren't the perfect, dominant alpha male you like to pretend to be. So I made a choice. I chose to protect your fragile, pathetic ego. I took a long breath, letting years of buried anger finally rise to the surface where it belonged. I agreed to keep your infertility an absolute secret. I let your mother make snide little comments at Thanksgiving about my biological clock. I let your friends crack their inappropriate jokes at my expense. I absorbed all the blame, every drop of it. And then I voluntarily put my own body through hell for you. 18 months of excruciating hormone injections, 3 rounds of agonizing in vitro fertilization using anonymous donor material, all so we could build the family you claim to want. And when my body finally gave out, when I suffered a miscarriage that nearly broke me in half, you didn't comfort me. You never once thanked me for what I sacrificed. I lifted a finger and pointed it directly at his chest. You used my grief, my physical exhaustion, as your excuse to start sleeping with my best friend. You told Amber I was a frigid, barren failure just to justify your disgusting affair. You built your entire new life on the foundation of my silence. Nate's knees buckled beneath him. The full weight of his public exposure finally crashed down and crushed him where he stood. He dropped hard onto the marble floor, landing on his knees directly in front of me, and buried his face in trembling hands, letting out a hollow, agonized groan. His whole identity had been constructed around his sense of masculine superiority, and I had just methodically taken it apart, piece by piece, in front of a lobby full of strangers, his own mother, and the woman who had replaced me. Amber watched Nate collapse with raw panic flooding her eyes. The gilded life she had stolen was disintegrating in real time, right there on the tile. She snapped instantly into aggressive defense mode, clutching the wailing baby tighter against her chest and beginning to sob loudly, weaponizing her tears as effectively as she could manage. Nate, look at me. Amber dropped to her knees beside him, reaching for his shoulder. He flinched violently away from her hand before she could even make contact. It doesn't matter what she says. Listen to me. I knew about your condition, Nate. I found the medical paperwork hidden in your home office desk months ago. I already knew you couldn't have children. Nate slowly lowered his hands, turning to look at Amber with hollow, bloodshot eyes. You knew? Yes, Amber cried, her voice trembling with carefully manufactured emotion, deploying what was clearly her ultimate gaslighting tactic. I knew, and it broke my heart to watch you carry that sadness around. I wanted to give you the family you'd always dreamed of. So I went to a fertility clinic in secret. I used a high-end sperm bank, Nate. I chose a donor who looked exactly like you. Your height, your build. I went through every treatment alone because I wanted it to be a surprise. I did all of it out of pure love. This baby is ours, Nate. Every bit of this I did for you. It was a spectacular performance. Amber genuinely believed she could talk her way out of any corner she'd backed herself into. She thought her tears, and her absurd tale of a secret sperm bank donor, would somehow repair the trust she had shattered into 1,000 pieces. She even shot me a fleeting, triumphant glance, convinced she had just successfully rescued her $2 million lifestyle. But she had completely forgotten about the fifth person in this conversation. From the far corner of the waiting room, Ryan let out a loud, barking laugh, a harsh, mocking sound that shattered Amber's carefully constructed illusion in an instant. He pushed himself off the wall and took a few slow, deliberate steps toward the kneeling couple, his green eyes glinting with malicious amusement as they settled on Amber. A secret sperm bank donor, Ryan repeated slowly, his deep voice practically dripping with sarcasm. That's a brilliant performance, Sugarplum, truly Oscar-worthy. But you and I both know the only clinic we ever visited was the penthouse suite at the Four Seasons downtown. Amber froze instantly, the fake tears drying up on her pale, terrified face. She stared at Ryan with wide, desperate eyes, silently begging him to stop talking. But Ryan was clearly savoring every second of the total, irreversible destruction of his older brother's perfect little world. He reached into the inner pocket of his worn leather jacket and produced a thick, tightly bound stack of printed papers, tossing it casually onto the marble floor, right between the kneeling couple. The papers fanned out across the tile, revealing dozens of vividly colored photographs alongside pages of dense black and white text. Nate slowly lifted his head, his wide, bloodshot eyes tracking the scattered documents with mounting dread. "What is this?" His voice came out barely above a whisper. "That's the actual truth, big bro," Ryan answered cheerfully, crossing his arms over his chest. "Since you love your official paperwork so much today, I figured I'd bring my own receipts. I'm not exactly the responsible type, but when a woman starts funneling hundreds of thousands of dollars my way to keep her dirty secrets buried, I make sure to keep a detailed backup file, just in case she ever decides to cut me off. Which, by the way, Amber, was a massive, unforgivable mistake on your part." Nate reached out with a trembling hand and picked up the first few pages from the floor. I stood back and watched his face twist into a mask of pure agony as his mind slowly processed the horrific images in front of him. They were printed screenshots of explicit text messages spanning more than a year and a half. Amber's phone number sat printed clearly at the top of every page. There were graphic photographs of the two of them tangled together in expensive hotel bedsheets, champagne flutes in hand, laughing at the camera. There were digital receipts for luxury room service, couples massages, and high-end jewelry, all meticulously dated during the exact stretches of time Nate believed he was paying for his brother's addiction treatment at a California rehabilitation facility. "You see, Nate," Ryan explained, pacing slowly around the kneeling couple like a shark circling a sinking ship. "I never actually made it to Malibu. Amber talked me into staying local. Easily, honestly. She intercepted the clinic invoices you so diligently paid every single month and forged the facility director's signature. Then she took your executive salary and booked me under a fake name at the most expensive hotels in Seattle. We had a really great arrangement going, if I'm being honest. You'd head out of town to crush your regional sales quotas, and she'd come straight to my hotel room to spend your money and complain about how boring you were in bed." Amber scrambled forward, desperately trying to gather the scattered papers, snatching the explicit photographs out of Nate's hands. "Stop it! Stop it right now!" she shrieked, her voice cracking under the weight of raw panic. "He's lying to you, Nate. He's an addict. He doctored these photos on a computer. He forged these hotel receipts. You cannot believe a single word he says. He just wants your money." Nate didn't even look at her. He completely ignored her frantic scrambling. His eyes were locked, blank and unblinking, on a single text message printout still clutched in his hand. He read the typed words aloud, his voice entirely hollow, drained of every trace of life. "I'm pregnant. Don't worry, baby. I'll just tell Nate it's a miracle donor baby and slap his name on the birth certificate. He's so obsessed with his legacy he'll never even question it. We're set for life." Nate let the paper slip from his numb fingers. It drifted to the floor and settled beside Amber's knee. That message had been sent exactly 10 months before the baby boy with the green eyes and the crooked little dimple was born. The realization crashed over Nate in a suffocating wave of humiliation. The beautiful $2 million mansion in Bellevue. The perfect new wife he loved to brag about. The miraculous son he had paraded through the hospital lobby just 20 minutes earlier to humiliate me. All of it, every last piece, was a spectacularly cruel, expensive illusion. Amber hadn't just cheated on him. She had weaponized his deepest insecurities and his desperate longing for a family in order to hijack his entire life and drain his bank accounts dry. She had legally bound him to a child that belonged to the very brother he despised. Nate slowly rose off the floor, his movements stiff and mechanical, like a machine pushed far beyond the edge of its own breaking point. The arrogant, boastful regional sales director I'd once known was gone. In his place stood a man who had just lost his entire reality in the span of 30 minutes. Caroline sat frozen in her chair, one hand pressed over her mouth in silent horror, finally understanding that her golden daughter-in-law was, in truth, a monstrous fraud. Nate turned his head and stared directly into Ryan's smug, satisfied smile. The heavy silence stretched across the lobby for one agonizing second. Then Nate let out a deafening, primal scream that seemed to rattle the glass windows of the clinic, a sound of pure, uncontrolled violence. He lunged forward with explosive speed and tackled his own brother straight into a row of waiting room chairs. The chairs splintered and cracked beneath their combined weight as the two men crashed onto the marble floor. Amber screamed hysterically, clutching the wailing infant against her. Fists began flying in a brutal, bloody blur. High-pitched security alarms erupted across the entire hospital wing, signaling a code white emergency. 4 burly security guards in dark blue uniforms sprinted around the reception desk, heavy boots pounding against the polished marble, and threw themselves fearlessly into the violent tangle of limbs, trying desperately to pry Nate off his younger brother. Nate was completely feral. His hands were wrapped tightly around Ryan's collar, screaming incoherent guttural threats, his expensive tailored navy suit jacket tearing loudly at the shoulder seam. Blood ran freely from Nate's nose, a direct souvenir from the sharp, desperate elbow Ryan had thrown in self-defense the moment Nate first tackled him. Parents grabbed their children and fled toward the hallways. 2 off-duty police officers waiting near the pharmacy entrance abandoned their coffees mid-sip and rushed to help the struggling security team. It took 6 grown men to finally haul the enraged, thrashing regional sales director off his bleeding brother. Nate fought against them wildly the entire way, kicking out and knocking over a heavy metal rack of pediatric health brochures, chest heaving like a trapped wild animal fighting for its last breath. The sharp metallic click of police handcuffs cut through the blaring alarms. Officers forced Nate down into a hard plastic chair, wrenching his arms behind his back and securing them tightly. Ryan slowly sat up on the floor, wiping a thick line of blood from his split lip with the back of his hand. He didn't look angry at all. He actually started laughing again, a dark, raspy sound that only further enraged his handcuffed, humiliated brother. Caroline let out a high-pitched, theatrical wail, burying her heavily powdered face in trembling hands. The pristine, ultra-wealthy image of the Seattle Pediatric Clinic had been utterly demolished in a matter of chaotic, violent seconds. Amber stood pressed flat against the wall, clutching her crying baby tightly to her chest. Her wide, panicked eyes darted frantically between her handcuffed, bloody husband and the bleeding, smirking brother now sitting on the floor. She possessed the cold, calculating survival instincts of a cornered rat. Watching the officers radio in for backup, she understood instantly that the comfortable, lucrative marriage she had so carefully engineered was now completely dead. The beautiful illusion of the perfect wealthy family lay shattered beyond any hope of repair. Nate was publicly ruined, professionally destroyed, and almost certainly facing serious felony assault charges. There was no more use for the fragile, weeping wife routine. The fake tears stopped falling as if a switch had been flipped. Her trembling shoulders straightened, stiff and sudden. Amber adjusted her grip on the screaming infant and stepped away from the wall, her designer heels clicking sharply against the tile with every deliberate step. Her expression hardened into a chilling mask of pure, calculating malice. She didn't look at Nate. She made no attempt to comfort her husband, no attempt to defend him to the officers taking statements nearby. Instead, she turned her venomous gaze entirely onto me, standing perfectly calm beside Jamal, watching the wreckage of their lives unfold with quiet, undisturbed satisfaction. My complete lack of emotional reaction seemed to ignite something uncontrollable inside her, a fire of pure resentment. She needed desperately to feel superior in this moment. She needed to prove to everyone in that room that she was still the ultimate winner of this twisted, deceitful game she had played so carefully. She marched aggressively toward me, ignoring the officers taking witness statements just a few feet away. "You think this changes anything?" she shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly through the chaos. "You think you just won, Amanda? You think exposing this little secret somehow makes you the victor here? You're completely delusional. I never cared about Nate. I never cared about his fragile little ego or his desperate, exhausting need to always be the smartest guy in the room. He was just a convenient stepping stone for me. Look at him right now, a pathetic, bleeding mess in handcuffs. But I still won. I got exactly what I wanted from the very beginning." Amber gestured wildly with her free hand, jabbing a manicured finger at my face. "You're still just a sad, lonely woman in a cheap business suit. I'm rich. I'm completely set for life." When Nate thought we were building our perfect little dream family, he eagerly put the deed to that $2 million Bellevue mansion entirely in my name. Wanted to protect his assets from future liabilities, he said. He was too blindingly stupid to understand what he was actually handing over. "That house is mine, free and clear. And that massive executive bonus he was bragging about just minutes ago, the hundreds of thousands in cash, he transferred every last penny into my private accounts to fund my new interior design business. He handed me everything on a silver platter." She took another aggressive step forward, a vicious, triumphant sneer curling across her otherwise beautiful features. "So go ahead. Gloat all you want, Amanda. Stand there with your fancy lawyer brother-in-law and your completely useless medical records. Nate's headed to a jail cell. Ryan's crawling back to whatever gutter he came from. And I'm going straight back to my 6-bedroom estate overlooking the water. I have the money. I have the house. I have the lifestyle. I played this game perfectly, and I took everything that was supposed to be yours. You're still just a glorified auditor spending your miserable life counting other people's money. You'll always be a lonely, bitter accountant, and I'll be living in permanent luxury." I let her finish her desperate, screaming rant. I let her savor her brief, deeply delusional moment of victory. The waiting room fell quiet again, the blaring alarms finally silenced by the panicked front desk staff. I looked calmly at Amber, then at the handcuffed Nate, who was staring at his wife in sheer horrified disbelief, having just heard her openly confess to using him purely for his money. Then I burst into genuine, unrestrained laughter. It wasn't a bitter, defensive laugh. It was bright and full, a sound of pure amusement that carried clean across the tense room. I slowly reached up to the lapel of my tailored blazer and unclipped the plastic identification card I had been wearing since I first walked into the building. I held it directly in front of Amber's flushed face, making sure the bold black lettering was perfectly legible. "I am an auditor, Amber," I said cheerfully, "but you should really read the full job title." The badge read, "Forensic Auditor, Vanguard Health Systems." Amber stared blankly at the laminated square dangling from my fingers, her perfectly sculpted eyebrows knotting together in confusion. Vanguard Health Systems wasn't just a local clinic. It was the massive corporate umbrella that owned this pediatric facility, along with 32 other high-end hospitals scattered across the Pacific Northwest. I wasn't standing in this lobby today to mourn my broken body, or beg some fertility specialist for a miracle cure, I continued. "I'm here because the federal government hired my independent firm to conduct a top-to-bottom financial investigation of Vanguard's regional operations. I'm leading a team of 20 senior auditors, tearing through millions of dollars in restricted corporate data, hunting down every missing cent." I tilted my head, watching the horrifying realization spread slowly across Amber's face. You honestly thought I was here as a patient? You really believed I was spending my Wednesday afternoon crying in a waiting room over a man who faked his own vitality? I've been stationed in the executive boardroom on the top floor of this very building for the last 3 weeks. I only came down to the lobby today to grab a black coffee from the cafeteria. Stumbling into your pathetic little family drama was purely, wonderfully coincidental. I let the badge drop back against my blazer with a soft click. Amber took a small, uncertain step backward, her earlier bravado thoroughly punctured, finally beginning to grasp the terrifying scope of my actual profession. You and Nate have spent the last 6 months calling me a glorified bookkeeper, I went on, my voice steady and commanding. You love mocking my career at dinner parties. But a forensic accountant doesn't just balance checkbooks, Amber. My entire professional existence is dedicated to finding hidden money. I hunt down offshore accounts. I dismantle fake shell companies. I expose arrogant men who think they're clever enough to steal without ever leaving a digital footprint. When Nate aggressively locked me out of our joint savings accounts during the divorce proceedings, I didn't sit back and cry about it. I went straight to work. I pulled every resource I had and started digging through every single financial transaction he'd made over the past 5 years. And what I found, buried deep in his ledgers, was truly spectacular. I reached into my structured leather tote and pulled out a slim silver tablet, tapping the screen to bring up a meticulously color-coded financial spreadsheet. The product of 72 straight hours of assembling and verifying data. I turned the tablet around and handed it to Jamal. My brother-in-law took the device, adjusting his suit jacket with an expression of pure legal anticipation, scanning the neatly organized rows of numbers. A slow, predatory smile spread across his handsome face. He looked down at Nate, slumped in the plastic chair, handcuffed and bleeding, now surrounded by officers listening intently to every word. Nate, Jamal said, his deep voice carrying a terrifyingly casual tone. Let's talk about that massive executive bonus you were just bragging about to my sister-in-law. The hundreds of thousands in cash you claimed you'd earned for being a top-tier corporate closer. I find that absolutely fascinating, especially considering your employer officially froze all executive bonuses 2 full quarters ago due to severe budget constraints. Jamal began pacing slowly across the lobby floor, reading aloud from the illuminated screen. On October 12th, exactly 2 weeks before you officially filed for divorce from Amanda, a corporate wire transfer of exactly $400,000 left your company's primary vendor payment account. That transfer was entirely unauthorized. It bypassed the standard payroll system completely and was disguised as a payment for logistical software upgrades. According to the routing numbers Amanda traced, that $400,000 bounced through 2 separate offshore holding accounts before quietly landing in a domestic business checking account right here in Seattle. Jamal paused his pacing and looked up from the tablet, his dark eyes settling directly on Amber, whose face had gone completely white. The receiving account belongs to a newly registered limited liability company called Amberglow Interiors, he announced smoothly, a supposed high-end interior design firm with 0 active clients, 0 registered business licenses, and 0 tax history. You didn't get a massive bonus, Nate. You committed massive corporate embezzlement, and you, Amber, graciously provided the fraudulent shell company needed to successfully launder the stolen funds. You two didn't buy that $2 million Bellevue mansion with hard-earned corporate success. You bought it with stolen company money. You committed textbook money laundering. And the paper trail is absolutely undeniable. The hospital lobby went dead silent. Even the baby in Amber's arms seemed to stop crying, as though sensing the heavy, suffocating weight of impending legal disaster settling over the room. The 2 officers standing guard over Nate straightened immediately, hands resting instinctively near their utility belts. embezzlement of that scale crossed the line from a simple civil dispute straight into federal felony territory. Ryan let out a low, impressed whistle from his spot on the floor, clearly savoring the fact that his older brother was going down for something far worse than a mere hotel affair. "That's a total lie!" Nate suddenly screamed, thrashing violently against the plastic chair. The sudden movement made the handcuffs bite sharply into his wrists, but he didn't seem to register the pain at all. He was practically foaming at the mouth, his face darkening to an alarming shade of purple. "She manufactured those documents. She's hacking my private accounts to frame me because she's a jealous, crazy ex-wife. I earned that money. I'm a senior regional director. I didn't steal anything. Don't listen to a single word she says." Amber shook her head frantically, backing away from Jamal as if he were holding a live grenade. "I didn't do anything," she stammered, her voice high and breathless with panic. "He told me it was his hard-earned bonus. He told me to set up the business account for tax purposes because his accountant suggested it. I swear to God, I had no idea it was stolen money. I am completely innocent in all of this." Jamal only sighed, shaking his head at their pathetic, disjointed display of panic. He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out his sleek smartphone, tapping the screen a few times to navigate to his recent calls list. "You can scream and deny it all you want, Nate," Jamal said, his voice dropping into a cold, unforgiving register that cut clean through the noise. "But Amanda and I don't make serious criminal accusations without airtight, verifiable proof." He pressed a button on the screen and held the phone up high for the room to see. "And we certainly don't keep this kind of lucrative information to ourselves. Let's see what your chief executive officer thinks about your creative accounting practices. I have him right here, on speakerphone." Jamal tapped the speaker icon, and a crisp, authoritative voice instantly filled the quiet lobby. "Yes, Jamal, I'm still on the line," the voice said. Everyone at the corporate office knew that distinctive, commanding tone. It belonged to Richard Montgomery, the notoriously ruthless CEO of the massive logistics corporation Nate had spent his entire adult life serving. Nate let out a sudden, strangled gasp, his already bleeding face draining to an even paler shade of gray. "Mr. Montgomery, please tell my client what your Internal Affairs Division concluded this morning," Jamal requested smoothly, holding the phone closer to the handcuffed man. "Well," Richard Montgomery began, his voice dripping with pure corporate disdain. "Exactly 48 hours ago, our legal department received a highly detailed, anonymous, encrypted file containing a complete forensic breakdown of our quarterly vendor payouts. We immediately launched an emergency internal audit to verify the claims. The digital evidence we uncovered is absolutely undeniable and completely damning. Nathaniel David systematically bypassed our internal security protocols and personally authorized a fraudulent $400,000 wire transfer to an unauthorized, unverified shell company." Nate shook his head frantically, handcuffs clinking sharply against the plastic chair. "Richard, please, you have to listen to me," he begged, his voice cracking under the weight of pure desperation. "This is a massive misunderstanding. I can explain everything. I was going to put the money back before the end of the fiscal year. It was just a temporary loan to myself. You know I'm your top regional closer. You need me." "You're a thief, Nate," Richard Montgomery interrupted, his voice colder than ice. "And you're a massive liability. As of 9 o'clock this morning, you are officially terminated from this corporation, effective immediately. Your key card has been deactivated. Your company vehicle has been reported stolen and is currently being towed from your driveway. You will receive 0 severance pay. Your unvested stock options are void, and your company health insurance is canceled. Furthermore, my legal team has already handed the entire forensic file over to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We will press maximum criminal charges. Do not attempt to contact me or anyone else at this company ever again." The line went dead with a sharp final click. Nate slumped forward in his chair, broad shoulders shaking violently. The invincible, arrogant regional sales director had just been financially executed on speakerphone in the middle of a hospital lobby in front of everyone who mattered. He had absolutely nothing left. Suddenly, a loud, dramatic gasp echoed from the waiting room chairs. Caroline, realizing that her son's lucrative career and immense wealth had just completely evaporated, decided to deploy her ult into her head. She slid, slowly and deliberately, out of her plastic chair, careful to land somewhat gracefully on the cold marble tile so as not to ruin her expensive designer outfit. The stress of these vicious lies is killing me. I'm having a massive heart attack. Someone get a doctor, right now. I'm dying. It was a pathetic, transparent attempt to derail the entire situation and pull everyone's focus away from her son's federal crimes and onto herself instead. A few bystanders gasped, but Jamal and I simply stood there, entirely unbothered by her terrible performance. Fortunately, we happened to be standing inside a high-end medical facility. A young, no-nonsense emergency room nurse who had been watching the chaos unfold from the reception desk rushed over immediately, dropping to her knees beside Caroline and pulling a stethoscope and portable blood pressure cuff from her cart. Caroline continued gasping dramatically for air, clutching at the nurse's arm. "Please, you have to save me," she whispered weakly, squeezing her eyes shut. The nurse wrapped the cuff around Caroline's arm and pumped it up, then pressed the stethoscope against her chest, listening for a few seconds. Then she let out a heavy, irritated sigh, ripped the cuff off, and stood, looking down at the older woman with an expression of pure professional annoyance. "Her heart rate is completely normal," the nurse announced loudly, making sure her voice carried across the entire lobby. "Her blood pressure is perfectly stable, and her oxygen levels are excellent. You are not having a heart attack, ma'am. You are having a temper tantrum. Please get off the floor before I call psychiatric services to evaluate you for a panic disorder." The surrounding bystanders immediately began whispering and pointing. Caroline's face flushed a deep, humiliating shade of purple. Her fake medical emergency had backfired spectacularly, exposing her as a manipulative fraud in front of dozens of witnesses. She angrily swatted the nurse's hand away, scrambling awkwardly back to her feet, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. Her ultimate weapon of manipulative maternal guilt had proven entirely useless here, neutralized completely by cold clinical fact. While everyone remained momentarily distracted by Caroline's embarrassing performance, Amber quietly shifted her weight. I watched her from the corner of my eye. She had drifted away from the center of the lobby, still clutching her crying baby tightly against her chest, her gaze flicking toward the main sliding glass doors just 30 feet away, the reality of her situation finally, fully, setting in. She was no longer just the woman associated with scandalous infidelity. Her acceptance of a substantial wire transfer into a fabricated business account had irrevocably transformed her identity. She had now become a direct accomplice in a scheme of federal corporate embezzlement. If Nate was destined for a lengthy federal prison sentence, she was unequivocally heading down the same path with him. With a single, silent step backward, followed by another, she pivoted her body towards the exit. Her intention was clear: to sprint through the glass doors and vanish into the bustling, anonymous expanse of Seattle's streets before the authorities could fully unravel the intricate details of her direct complicity in the elaborate financial crime. In that moment of desperate self-preservation, she genuinely believed she could simply abandon her utterly ruined husband, who was in police custody, retain any remaining stolen funds held within her illicit business accounts, and abscond to forge a completely new existence. She had neared the very periphery of the pediatric waiting area when Jamal, with a deliberate and unhurried motion, turned his substantial head. He didn't resort to shouting across the crowded space, nor did he even consider the indignity of physically pursuing her. Instead, he calmly adjusted his expensive silk tie, his dark, focused gaze locking onto her retreating form. Then, in a measured, resonant voice that possessed an almost supernatural ability to command attention, he spoke words that effectively froze her in her tracks, dismantling her final fragile illusion of escape. Relocating or fleeing the jurisdiction will prove entirely futile, Amber, he stated, his tone devoid of anger but heavy with authority. We have already placed a comprehensive freeze on all your financial accounts. Amber halted mere inches from the sliding glass doors. An involuntary rigidity seized her entire body. The automatic doors hissed open, admitting a refreshing gust of cool Seattle air, yet she found herself utterly incapable of taking another step forward. Slowly, she turned back to confront Jamal, her eyes wide with a terrifying confluence of sheer panic and mounting desperation. The infant crying in her arms seemed to instinctively absorb her escalating anxiety, its wails intensifying within the hushed lobby. Amber's gaze flickered from the two uniformed officers flanking the handcuffed Nate to Jamal, who was calmly reinserting his mobile phone into the pocket of his impeccably tailored jacket. Finally, her eyes met Nate's. The man she had so artfully seduced, skillfully manipulated, and systematically drained dry, now represented nothing more than a colossal legal encumbrance, irrevocably shackled to her own fate. Her primal survival instincts surged to their absolute zenith. Without a millisecond of hesitation, she performed an act of staggering betrayal, ruthlessly sacrificing her husband with a breathtaking and vicious swiftness. I had absolutely no involvement whatsoever in any of this, Amber shrieked, her perfectly manicured hand trembling as she pointed an accusing finger directly at Nate. He completely manipulated me. He deceived me on a daily basis. He returned home and informed me that he had received a substantial executive bonus for successfully closing a major logistics contract. I am merely a stay-at-home mother, striving to build a secure life for my son. I placed my trust in my husband. I never once requested to review the corporate financial statements. How could I possibly have discerned that he was pilfering funds from his own company? I am the victim in this situation. Nate slowly raised his head, the bleeding from his wounds a stark testament to his current predicament. He gazed at the woman for whom he had systematically dismantled his entire marriage. He had betrayed his devoted wife, alienated his family, and committed a grave federal offense, all in an effort to provide Amber with the opulent lifestyle she incessantly demanded. And now, at the very first sign of tangible peril, she was callously discarding him to safeguard her own liberty. A single pathetic tear traced a path through the smeared blood on Nate's cheek. He lacked the residual energy to even dispute her fabricated narrative any longer. His spirit was irrevocably and utterly shattered. Amber, however, remained unmoved by his silent despair. She was already orchestrating her subsequent desperate maneuver. "Fine," she snapped, her voice laced with a defiant tremor as she fixed her glare upon Jamal. "If the business bank accounts are frozen, then retain the funds. I truly do not care anymore. I do not require it. The Bellevue mansion is legally registered in my name. The deed is entirely unencumbered. The real estate market in this city is currently experiencing an unprecedented surge. I will arrange for a premier luxury real estate agent this very afternoon. I will list the property by tomorrow morning, secure an all-cash sale, extract my considerable equity, and depart this dreadful city permanently. You possess no authority to prevent me from divesting myself of my personal property. Jamal, the deed bears my name. I will take my son and disappear, and none of you will ever encounter me again." She lifted her chin, making a concerted effort to project an air of unassailable confidence. She genuinely harbored the conviction that tangible real estate constituted her ultimate foolproof escape route. She envisioned liquidating the substantial asset they had illicitly acquired and walking away completely unscathed, leaving Nate to languish in a federal prison cell. I advanced with a slow, deliberate step, moving past Jamal. The pristine marble flooring responded with a soft click beneath my shoes. I met Amber's gaze, my expression conveying a profound and chilling calmness. I had meticulously anticipated and patiently awaited this precise exchange for 6 long months. "You are unable to sell the property, Amber," I stated, my voice slicing through the charged atmosphere with the precision of a finely honed blade. Amber emitted a loud scoff, her eyes rolling in an exaggerated display of incredulity. "Just watch me, Amanda. You are an auditor, not a judicial arbiter of real estate transactions. You hold absolutely no legal jurisdiction over my personal assets. My name is clearly printed on the first page of the deed." I reached into my structured leather tote bag for what would be the final time. My fingers bypassed the medical records and the corporate audit files, instead encircling a thick, substantial legal document bound in dark blue cardstock. I withdrew it and held it aloft. "The deed may bear your name, Amber," I explained with patient clarity, as if addressing a child of limited comprehension. "But a deed is rendered entirely worthless when the property is encumbered by a substantial mortgage, and unfortunately for you, your particular mortgage is no longer held by the financial institution with which you originally executed the agreement." Amber's brow furrowed, her facade of false confidence faltering infinitesimally. "What precisely are you implying? We secured financing through a private commercial lender. Nate arranged the entire transaction." "That is precisely correct," I replied, closing the distance between us further, ensuring she could clearly discern the bold legal print on the blue cover. During our contentious divorce proceedings, Nate meticulously concealed his assets. He forged official documents to artificially devalue our jointly owned starter home, thereby effectively usurping my rightful half of the equity to finance your extravagant new lifestyle. He evidently presumed I would merely weep and accept the paltry settlement he offered. However, I utilized the modest sum of cash I secured from that arrangement and immediately commenced my course of action. I leveraged my extensive professional network. I established an anonymous corporate shell entity, a highly insulated limited liability corporation duly registered in Delaware. And then, I waited with unwavering patience. When Nate hastily purchased that opulent Bellevue mansion for you, his credit was still legally ensnared within the complexities of our ongoing divorce proceedings. I continued, my voice steady and unwavering. So, he strategically opted for a highly specialized, aggressive subprime commercial lender to secure the immense loan needed. This was an undeniably foolish, desperate financial maneuver on his part. Fortunately for me, due to my privileged access to comprehensive banking databases, I was able to meticulously track that precise loan. Just 2 weeks prior, this commercial lender engaged in the practice of bundling a substantial portfolio of high-risk mortgages, subsequently selling them off to private investors at a significant discount to artificially bolster their quarterly financial reports. Your mortgage was inherently included within that specific risk-laden portfolio. Amber's head recoiled, her grip tightening on the infant to such an extent that the child began to squirm and whimper in protest. "I cannot grasp your explanation. It is remarkably straightforward, Amber," I responded, a subtle smile playing on my lips as I tapped the substantial blue document. My anonymous shell company executed the purchase of that exact debt portfolio. In essence, I now own the very paper upon which your house is constructed. My role extends far beyond that of an erstwhile best friend. I am now your primary legal creditor. I hold the mortgage on your property." I continued, elaborating on the consequences. "And given that the bank accounts you designated for the automated monthly payments by the federal government have been comprehensively frozen due to the ongoing corporate fraud investigation, your mortgage is now officially in a state of severe default." Amber emitted a soft, horrified gasp. The color leached completely from her visage, rendering her appearance akin to that of a terrified specter. "You cannot proceed with selling the house, Amber," I stated, my voice a low whisper, delivering the final devastating blow. "Because I am now legally initiating foreclosure proceedings. You are left with absolutely nothing." Amber stood utterly and completely paralyzed. The vibrant hue had entirely abandoned her complexion, transforming her skin into something resembling cracked porcelain under the harsh illumination of the hospital lobby's fluorescent lights. Her gaze fixated on the thick blue document held in my hands, regarding it as if it were a loaded weapon pointed directly at her chest. Her mouth opened and closed repeatedly, but no coherent sound emerged. The once arrogant and triumphant woman, who had so proudly expatiated on the grandeur of her Bellevue mansion mere minutes earlier, was now completely obliterated. In her place stood a terrified, cornered animal, acutely aware that the trap had irrevocably sprung shut. I deliberately opened the heavy blue folder. From within, I withdrew a crisp white legal document, printed on official state watermarked paper. I extended it towards her. "This constitutes your formal notification of default and pending eviction, Amber," I declared with absolute clarity, ensuring each syllable resonated throughout the hushed waiting area. "As the federal government officially froze all your illicit business and personal bank accounts this morning, your automated mortgage payment was consequently returned. Your loan agreement contained a particularly stringent acceleration clause, specifically designed for circumstances involving corporate fraud and asset freezing. This clause was immediately activated the very moment the FBI placed a hold on your routing numbers. Consequently, your considerable debt is now entirely due and payable, and given your absolute inability to satisfy this obligation, the property legally belongs to me." Amber recoiled, refusing to accept the document. She shrank backward, clutching the crying infant so fiercely that the child let out a sharp cry of distinct discomfort. Ryan, who remained comfortably seated on the marble floor, diligently dabbing at the blood trickling from his split lip, issued a low whistle of genuine admiration. "You certainly don't waste any time, Amanda," he remarked, a soft chuckle escaping him, clearly reveling in the utter dismantling of the woman who had so thoroughly exploited him. I took another step forward and firmly tucked the folded eviction notice directly into a side pocket of Amber's expensive designer diaper bag. "You have precisely 30 days to vacate the premises," I informed her, my voice devoid of any discernible sympathy. "However, frankly, considering the gravity of the federal fraud charges now hanging over your head, you might find it prudent to commence packing your belongings this very evening. The authorities have a tendency to seize all luxury assets acquired through the misappropriation of corporate funds. You will not be residing in a multi-million-dollar mansion. Instead, you will be occupying a seat in a federal courtroom, attempting to explain how you inadvertently laundered $400,000 for your husband." The crushing weight of her complete and utter loss finally impacted Amber like a physical blow. Her knees visibly buckled, and she staggered backward until her shoulders collided heavily with the painted drywall. She slid down the wall, landing with a thud on the floor beside the shattered remnants of the baby bottle she had carelessly dropped earlier. Her gaze drifted to Nate, still handcuffed to the hard plastic chair, utterly unresponsive and staring blankly at his own bloodied footwear. He was incapable of saving her. He couldn't even salvage himself. Amber then looked down at the screaming infant cradled in her arms. This was the child she had strategically employed as her ultimate bargaining chip. She had deliberately engineered this entire pregnancy to secure Nate's considerable wealth and guarantee a life of perpetual luxury. But now, Nate was financially ruined and facing imminent imprisonment. The baby was biologically linked to Ryan, a penniless addict inhabiting cheap motel rooms funded by illicit gains. Her child had transformed from a golden ticket to a Bellevue mansion into a monumental financial liability, one she was entirely ill-equipped to manage. She possessed absolutely no financial resources, no place to reside, a baby she had never genuinely desired, and a terrifying conspiracy charge looming over her head. Tears began to stream down Amber's face. These were not the feigned, manipulative tears she had previously employed to cultivate a victim persona. These were tears of genuine, suffocating panic. She looked up at me, her chest heaving with desperate sobs. "Amanda, please," she implored, her voice cracking with heartbreaking pathos. "You cannot do this to me. I have a baby. Where am I supposed to go? I have no money for a lawyer. I have no one to assist me. You must put a stop to this." She extended a quivering hand, desperately attempting to grasp the hem of my tailored blazer. With practiced grace, I smoothly sidestepped out of her reach. "We were once best friends, Amanda," Amber cried out loudly, abandoning every last vestige of her pride in full view of the entire hospital lobby. "Remember college? Remember when we shared that minuscule apartment and subsisted on cheap noodles? You were my maid of honor at my first wedding. We confided absolutely everything to each other. You know my heart, Amanda. You know I am not some criminal mastermind. I made a dreadful mistake. I was foolish and avaricious. But please, I am begging you, do not take my home. Do not allow them to send me to prison. Please, show some mercy. Remember our friendship." I looked down at the pathetic, weeping woman sobbing on the cold tile floor. I remembered the friendship. I recalled the countless occasions I had patiently listened to her complaints about her life. I remembered the substantial sums of money I had loaned her. I remembered entrusting her with access to my home, only to return early from a business trip and discover the lingering scent of her expensive perfume on my bedsheets. I vividly remembered the smug, victorious smile gracing her face when she entered the divorce mediation proceedings holding Nate's hand. I slowly crouched down, positioning my face perfectly level with hers. The lobby had fallen completely silent, every occupant hanging intently on my every word. Leaning in closely, I ensured she could look directly into my cold, unforgiving eyes. "You terminated our friendship the moment you slept in my bed," I whispered softly. "Now, get out of my building." I straightened up and meticulously smoothed the front of my tailored blazer. Precisely on cue, the piercing wail of multiple approaching police sirens echoed loudly outside the heavy hospital doors, heralding the absolute and final ruination of their perfectly orchestrated stolen lives. The flashing red and blue lights from the converging police cruisers instantly bathed the clinic lobby in frantic, pulsating hues. The heavy automatic doors slid open, and 4 uniformed Seattle police officers stormed inside, their hands resting cautiously on their duty belts and holsters. They were responding to the urgent hospital alarm regarding a potential violent physical altercation. They moved swiftly towards the seating area, anticipating the standard procedure of taking a statement for a domestic disturbance and perhaps issuing a simple misdemeanor assault citation to the bleeding man shackled to the chair. However, their progress was abruptly halted. Walking immediately in the wake of the uniformed officers were 2 tall, stern-faced men clad in sharp, nondescript gray business suits. The hum of the hospital lobby had receded, replaced by the chilling pronouncements of federal authority. The 2 stoic agents from the FBI were not local law enforcement. Their movements possessed a terrifying, synchronized efficiency that bespoke rigorous training. The first agent, with a casual flick of his wrist, revealed a gleaming gold badge from a leather wallet. "Federal Bureau of Investigation," he announced, his voice resonating with an undeniable weight of absolute authority. "We are taking primary jurisdiction over this suspect." The local officers, recognizing the shift in command, immediately stepped aside, clearing a path. The 2 FBI agents, moving with unhurried purpose, bypassed Amber, still a crumpled heap of sobs on the floor, and even Ryan, who offered them a sardonic little wave. Their attention, however, was solely focused on Nate. His bloodshot eyes widened, registering sheer, unadulterated terror. He attempted to press himself further into the confines of the hard plastic chair, a desperate, futile effort to distance himself from the encroaching federal presence, but there was nowhere left to escape. Nathaniel David, the lead agent stated, withdrawing a folded white document from his breast pocket. We have a federal warrant for your immediate arrest. You are being charged with 3 counts of felony wire fraud, 2 counts of corporate embezzlement, and 1 count of conspiracy to commit money laundering across state lines. You have the right to remain silent. I highly suggest you use it. The metallic finality of his words hung in the air like a death sentence. The prospect of a local jail for a mere fistfight was one thing. Federal prison for pilfering hundreds of thousands of dollars from a massive corporate entity was an entirely different, far grimmer reality. Nate's breathing grew shallow and erratic. He scanned the lobby with frantic desperation, his eyes darting like a trapped animal searching for an improbable escape hatch. He sought a flicker of remorse in my gaze, but found only cold indifference. He looked to Amber, who actively turned her face away, utterly unwilling to meet the eyes of the man she had just so ruthlessly sacrificed. Finally, his desperate, pleading gaze settled upon the only individual in the room who had ever blindly championed his flawed behavior: his mother. "Mom," Nate choked out, his voice cracking with sheer panic. "Mom, you have to help me. They are making a huge mistake. Please call your bank. Liquidate your stock portfolio. Cash out your retirement funds. I need a top-tier federal defense attorney right now. You have to post my bail. Please, Mom, do not let them take me away." Caroline stood frozen near the reception desk. She regarded her son, the golden boy she had relentlessly lauded and aggressively defended throughout his entire life. She observed his bloodied face, his torn designer suit, and the heavy federal handcuffs digging into his wrists. Then, her gaze shifted to the 2 incredibly serious FBI agents standing over him. Caroline was a profoundly selfish, highly calculating woman whose existence revolved entirely around maintaining appearances and financial comfort. She rapidly performed a mental calculation. Her son was fired, completely broke, legally entwilled with a woman who laundered stolen money and facing years in a federal penitentiary. Contesting the United States government would incur hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees alone. It would completely deplete her meticulously amassed retirement accounts and force an end to her luxurious lifestyle. Caroline slowly tightened her grip on her expensive Hermes handbag. She straightened her posture, smoothing out imaginary wrinkles on her designer blouse. "I am so sorry," Caroline stated, her voice utterly devoid of maternal warmth or desperate affection. "But I simply cannot assist you. I am on a fixed income. I absolutely cannot squander my entire life savings on a lost cause. You brought this entirely upon yourself with your incredibly foolish, reckless behavior. I raised you to be a smart, successful businessman, not a common criminal. You have made your bed, and now you must lie in it. Do not call my house asking for money. I do not have it for you." Nate let out a devastating, heartbroken gasp. The absolute betrayal shattered whatever minuscule fragment of his spirit remained. His mother, who had aggressively defended his egregious actions mere minutes ago, was now brutally abandoning him to protect her own finances. She turned her back on her weeping, handcuffed son without a moment's hesitation. Her expensive heels clicked sharply against the marble floor as she marched briskly towards the exit, stepping deliberately over the shattered glass of the baby bottle. She disappeared through the sliding doors and into the bustling Seattle afternoon, never once looking back. "Let us go," the second FBI agent commanded, roughly grasping Nate by the bicep and hauling him forcefully out of the plastic chair. Nate stumbled forward, his legs barely supporting his own weight. The agents marched him purposefully towards the exit. As they neared the sliding glass doors, Nate ceased his struggle. He slowly turned his head over his shoulder, looking back across the lobby to meet my gaze one final time. I knew exactly what he was hoping to see. He longed to see a trace of sadness. He desperately wished to believe that, despite everything, I would miss him. But that was not what he saw. A tall, exceptionally handsome man, clad in a crisp white surgeon's coat, stepped up beside me. He smoothly wrapped his strong arms securely around my waist. Nate witnessed the genuine love in his eyes and finally succumbed to utter defeat, weeping. The man holding me was Dr. Cole, the head of cardiothoracic surgery at Vanguard Health Systems and, more importantly, my fiancé. We had met 3 months prior during a cross-departmental meeting concerning the hospital's financial restructuring. Unlike Nate, who was constantly intimidated by my intellect and attempted to belittle my career to inflate his own ego, Cole was captivated by it. He respected my sharp mind. He cherished my independence. He was brilliant, kind, and possessed a quiet, unshakable confidence that didn't necessitate tearing others down. He pressed a soft kiss to the side of my head, completely disregarding the chaotic spectacle of my ex-husband being escorted away by federal agents. "Are you all right, Amanda?" Cole asked, his deep voice imbued with genuine warmth and concern. I smiled up at him, experiencing a profound sense of peace. "I am perfectly fine," I replied. Outside the sliding glass doors, the reality of my incredible upgrade finally registered in Nate's panicked mind. The FBI agents forcefully shoved his head down, guiding him into the cramped back seat of the dark federal SUV. Before the heavy door slammed shut, Nate twisted his neck to look at us one last time. He saw the way Cole held me. He saw the massive, flawless diamond engagement ring glinting in the lobby light on my left hand. The life he had so carelessly thrown away had not been destroyed. It had flourished magnificently without him. The crushing weight of his monumental failure broke him completely. Nate let out a guttural, agonizing scream of pure torment that vibrated through the thick glass doors. It was the sound of a man witnessing heaven from the deepest pit of hell. The federal agent slammed the door shut, silencing his miserable cries, and the black SUV sped away from the hospital curb, disappearing into the Seattle traffic. Inside the lobby, the chaotic energy began to dissipate. The local police officers concluded their final reports and slowly filed out of the building. Jamal adjusted his bespoke suit jacket, snapping his sleek leather briefcase shut. The legal execution was entirely complete. I turned my attention back to the center of the room. Amber remained crumpled on the cold marble tile, her designer clothes stained with spilled baby formula and tears. She was hyperventilating, her chest heaving with violent, ragged sobs as she clutched the crying infant to her chest. She had lost her wealthy husband, her stolen mansion, and her entire future within the span of 30 minutes. But the universe was not yet finished extracting its payment. Ryan casually pushed himself away from the wall. He brushed off his worn leather jacket and walked slowly toward the weeping woman who had paid him to ruin his brother's life. He crouched down in front of Amber, his green eyes entirely devoid of any warmth or affection. He reached out with his large hands and firmly took the baby from her trembling arms. Amber gasped instinctively, attempting to pull the child back. "No, Ryan, please," she sobbed, her voice barely a whisper. "Give him back to me. He is all I have left. He is all I." Ryan easily overpowered her weakened grip and pulled the crying baby securely to his own chest. The child instantly settled against his biological father, the high-pitched cries subsiding into soft, exhausted hiccups. "You do not actually care about this kid, Sugar Plum," Ryan said, his voice laced with cruel amusement. "You only wanted him because you thought he was a golden ticket to a $2 million Bellevue mansion and a lifetime of endless shopping sprees. But that ticket just officially expired." Ryan, with a chillingly calm demeanor, laid bare the grim reality for Amber. "You are completely broke. You are getting evicted and you are about to face a massive federal judge for participating in a giant corporate money laundering scheme. You are a massive flight risk and a documented criminal accessory. Amber stared at him, her eyes wide with absolute horror as the final pieces of her shattered world clicked into place. I am the documented biological father, Ryan continued, a lopsided dimple appearing as he smiled ruthlessly. And despite my many personal flaws, I do not have any pending federal felony charges hanging over my head. I am going to walk directly from this hospital to family court. I am filing for emergency full legal and physical custody of my son. And the best part is, no judge in this state is going to hand a baby over to a woman facing 10 years in a federal penitentiary for wire fraud. Amber let out a hollow, agonizing moan, covering her face with her shaking hands. Ryan stood up, adjusting the baby comfortably in his arms. He looked down at her completely broken form with a terrifyingly sharp, calculating gaze. "Oh, and one more thing," Ryan added cheerfully. "You might be getting legally foreclosed on by Amanda, but until that federal paperwork fully processes, you are still technically the sole owner of all those non-frozen assets and whatever equity you manage to hide from the feds. So, as the primary custodial parent, I will also be suing you for maximum child support. I suggest you get a job at the prison cafeteria. You are going to need every single dime." With that, Ryan turned and walked casually toward the hospital exit, whistling a cheerful tune as he carried their son through the sliding doors and out into the bright afternoon sunlight. He did not look back. Jamal placed a supportive hand on my shoulder. "We are done here, Amanda," my brother-in-law said quietly. Dr. Cole nodded in agreement, taking my hand gently in his. "Let us go home," my fiancé said. We walked away, leaving the wreckage behind. The clinic lobby returned to its quiet state. The nurses retreated behind their desks. Patients picked up their magazines. Amber was left sitting on the hard floor of the hospital lobby, entirely alone, surrounded by the shattered glass of the baby bottle. 6 months passed since that explosive afternoon in the hospital lobby. The sharp chill of the Seattle winter had finally melted away into a bright, promising spring. I was sitting inside the sleek glass-enclosed conference room of Jamal's downtown corporate law office. The sprawling view of the city skyline from the 42nd floor was absolutely breathtaking, but my attention was completely focused on the thick stack of federal legal documents resting on the polished mahogany table in front of me. Dr. Cole, now officially my husband after a beautiful private ceremony on the coast last month, was currently in a marathon surgery. But I was not alone. Jamal sat across from me, looking impeccably sharp in a dark charcoal suit, casually flipping through the final pages of the federal plea agreement. The United States Justice Department had officially finalized their aggressive prosecution strategy. My comprehensive forensic accounting file had completely eliminated any chance of Nate fighting the charges in open court. The digital paper trail of his massive corporate embezzlement was entirely bulletproof. Nate was officially cornered. The document resting beneath my fingertips outlined the federal prosecutor's final, non-negotiable offer. Nathaniel David was going to plead guilty to 2 counts of felony wire fraud and 1 count of corporate embezzlement. In exchange for saving the government the time and massive expense of a highly publicized criminal trial, Nate was officially agreeing to serve a mandatory minimum of 5 full years in a federal penitentiary, followed by a decade of supervised probation and complete financial restitution to Vanguard Health Systems. He was 34 years old, and his entire life as a free, arrogant, wealthy man was permanently over. I took a slow sip of my hot black coffee, feeling a deep, profound sense of closure washing over my spirit. "It really is a solid plea agreement," I told Jamal, tracing the edge of the thick paper. 5 years in federal prison is exactly what he deserves for stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars to fund his pathetic double life. I just cannot believe his mother actually tried to make this entirely my fault after everything that happened. Jamal let out a loud, booming laugh that echoed off the glass walls of the conference room. Oh, Caroline was entirely delusional right up until the very bitter end, Jamal said, shaking his head in absolute amusement. You have to remember, Amanda, narcissism of that extreme magnitude does not just miraculously cure itself with a dose of harsh reality. He leaned back in his luxurious leather executive chair, stapling his fingers together with a look of pure legal satisfaction. After Nate was formally arrested and his assets were completely seized by the federal government, Caroline actually had the sheer audacity to hire a cheap strip mall attorney. She formally filed a civil lawsuit against you for severe emotional distress and public defamation. She honestly claimed that your perfectly legal, highly accurate forensic audit was a malicious, targeted attack designed specifically to destroy her fragile health and her sterling social reputation. I smiled, remembering the day the process server handed me that utterly ridiculous civil complaint. And how exactly is her sterling social reputation holding up these days? I asked cheerfully. Well, Jamal began, his voice dripping with triumphant sarcasm. I immediately filed a massive countersuit against her for filing a frivolous, bad faith lawsuit. I aggressively demanded she pay every single cent of our exorbitant legal fees. When the presiding judge saw the overwhelming federal evidence against her son, he threw her pathetic lawsuit entirely out of court and instantly granted our countersuit in full. Caroline was completely financially devastated. She had already drained a massive portion of her own savings trying to maintain her wealthy lifestyle after Nate stopped illegally funneling her cash. The court-ordered judgment completely wiped out her remaining retirement accounts. Jamal leaned forward, resting his elbows on the mahogany table. She could no longer afford the massive property taxes on her suburban home, he explained calmly. The bank foreclosed on her property 2 months ago since she alienated every single remaining family member with her toxic, manipulative behavior. Absolutely nobody offered to take her in. She was permanently evicted. He paused, a hint of grim satisfaction in his eyes. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that Caroline is now permanently residing in a tiny state-run assisted living facility on the outskirts of the city. She shares a cramped double room with a woman who apparently watches television at maximum volume all day long. Her wealthy country club friends completely abandoned her the second the federal indictment hit the local news. She is entirely broke, entirely alone, and legally prohibited from contacting us ever again. I leaned back in my chair, absorbing the sheer poetic justice of Caroline's miserable downfall. The sharp, persistent ringing of Jamal's office telephone shattered the quiet atmosphere of the conference room. Jamal glanced down at the flashing caller ID. His thick eyebrows shot up in genuine surprise. "You are never going to believe who is calling me right now," he said softly, his voice thick with anticipation. "Who is it?" I asked, sitting up perfectly straight. "It is the federal public defender assigned to represent your former best friend," Jamal announced. He pressed the speaker button. The anxious lawyer's voice immediately spoke clearly through the static line. "Amber is absolutely terrified. She desperately wants to make a formal deal. She will testify against Nate to avoid federal prison. Will you listen?" I looked at the speakerphone resting on the polished mahogany table, listening to the desperate, wavering voice. Amber wanted a deal. She wanted to play the terrified, manipulated housewife one last time to save her own skin. A cold, hard nod of absolute resolve formed in my chest. I looked at Jamal and slowly shook my head. Jamal leaned forward, his voice perfectly level and devoid of any professional sympathy. "Counsel, my client and I are not interested in entertaining any plea deals or testimony exchanges with your client," he stated clearly. "Amber is not a victim of circumstance, and she certainly is not a passive bystander. We have already submitted the secondary forensic accounting file to the federal prosecutor this morning. It contains indisputable digital proof that your client was an active, willing co-conspirator in the embezzlement scheme. The line went dead silent for a brief moment before the public defender tried to object, but Jamal cut him off immediately. We tracked the IP addresses used to establish the fraudulent LLC, Jamal continued, tapping a thick file folder on his desk. They originated directly from Amber's personal laptop. We also have copies of the bank signature cards. She deliberately forged corporate authorization documents to bypass the holding accounts. She knew exactly where the money was coming from, and she actively facilitated the transfer to fund her luxury lifestyle. Tell your client we will see her at the sentencing hearing. Jamal reached out and ended the call, severing Amber's final desperate lifeline. There would be absolutely no mercy. 2 weeks later, I sat in the wooden gallery benches of the federal courthouse, watching the final consequences of their actions crash down. The courtroom was vast, silent, and intimidating. Nate stood before the judge in a baggy orange jumpsuit, his arrogant posture completely broken. He looked older, his hair thinning and his face drawn. When the judge struck the gavel and officially handed down the mandatory 5-year sentence in a federal penitentiary, Nate did not even blink. His spirit had already been completely crushed in that hospital lobby 6 months ago. He simply lowered his head and allowed the federal marshals to lead him away through a heavy side door, vanishing from my life forever. Amber's fate was equally devastating, though she managed to avoid a federal prison cell due to a lack of prior criminal history and her minor role compared to Nate's corporate position. But her freedom was entirely an illusion. The judge handed down 3 years of incredibly strict federal probation. More importantly, she was ordered to pay massive financial restitution to Vanguard Health Systems for her role in the money laundering scheme. Every single luxury asset she possessed was seized and liquidated by the government, leaving her with absolutely nothing but the clothes on her back and a crushing mountain of permanent debt. Her reality outside the courtroom was even worse. Ryan had successfully won full legal custody of their son. True to his word, he immediately filed for maximum child support. Because Amber's bank accounts were drained to pay corporate restitution, she was forced to enter the workforce to satisfy the aggressive family court orders. The woman who once bragged about her $2 million Bellevue mansion and her interior design business was now working 40 hours a week at a discount retail store. She spent her days folding cheap sweaters for minimum wage, her wages heavily garnished before she even received her meager paycheck. She lived in a tiny studio apartment with 3 roommates, isolated from the wealthy social circles she had once desperately clawed her way into. She had tried to steal my life, and she ultimately sentenced herself to a lifetime of miserable poverty. With the legal battles officially concluded, I had one final piece of business to attend to before I could completely close this dark chapter. I drove my car through the winding tree-lined streets of Bellevue, pulling up to the massive iron gates of the property Nate and Amber had purchased with stolen money. The $2 million mansion stood silent and empty against the bright spring sky. My anonymous shell company had successfully completed the foreclosure process, meaning I was now the sole legal owner of the sprawling estate. I unlocked the heavy mahogany front door and stepped inside. The house was completely stripped bare. The expensive furniture, the custom nursery, the imported rugs. They were all gone, repossessed and auctioned off by federal authorities. My footsteps echoed loudly against the pristine hardwood floors as I walked through the massive, echoing rooms. It was a beautiful house, but it was built on a foundation of terrible lies and cruel betrayal. I felt absolutely no attachment to it. I did not want to live here. I just wanted the ultimate victory it represented. I walked into the massive chef's kitchen, sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and pulled my cell phone from my pocket. I dialed the number of a prominent commercial real estate developer I had been negotiating with for the past 3 weeks. He answered on the second ring. "I am standing inside the property now," I told him, looking out over the expansive, unkempt backyard. "I am ready to accept your final offer." The developer had offered me $3.2 million in pure cash to buy the estate, tear the mansion down, and subdivide the massive waterfront lot into 3 separate luxury properties. It was a massive, life-changing profit. I was not just reclaiming what was stolen from me. I was building a permanent empire on the ashes of their greed. I hung up the phone and turned to leave the empty house for the last time. But as I walked toward the front door, I noticed a crumpled, sealed envelope lying on the floor mat shoved hastily under the heavy doorframe. I picked it up, recognizing the messy, familiar handwriting instantly. It was not from my ex-husband. It was from Amber. The envelope was wrinkled, shoved under the door in desperate panic before she vacated the property. I tore the paper open and quickly scanned the frantic, pleading words. She was begging me for a cut of the sale. She claimed she needed a few thousand to secure an apartment because her roommates had kicked her out. She actually dared to invoke our past friendship, desperately hoping I would feel pity for the woman who tried to destroy my life. I did not feel pity. I felt absolutely nothing. I ripped the letter into tiny pieces and dropped the shredded paper directly into the outdoor garbage bin. 3 weeks later, I stood on the pristine sidewalk across the street from that same property. The bright morning sun warmed my shoulders as I leaned comfortably against my husband. Cole wrapped his arms securely around my waist, pulling me close as we watched the massive yellow excavators roll onto the manicured lawn. The commercial developer had completely finalized the permits, and today was demolition day. The heavy diesel engines roared to life, shaking the pavement beneath our feet. I watched with profound satisfaction as the massive metal claw of the excavator swung forward, crashing violently through the front windows of the $2 million mansion. The sound of shattering glass and splintering wood echoed through the quiet neighborhood. The elegant mahogany front door was ripped from its hinges and crushed into the dirt. The custom nursery. Amber bragged about the luxurious master suite where they had planned their stolen future. All of it was systematically reduced to a massive pile of broken rubble and thick gray dust. It was a deeply symbolic moment. That sprawling estate was the ultimate physical manifestation of their toxic legacy. It was built entirely on lies, betrayal, and massive corporate fraud. Watching it literally crumble to the ground felt like the final heavy weight lifting completely off my chest. The slate was officially wiped clean. They were completely erased from my reality, leaving behind nothing but an empty plot of land ready for a brand new foundation. Later that same afternoon, the smell of wood smoke and grilled food filled the warm spring air. I was standing in the expansive, sunlit backyard of the beautiful new home Cole and I had purchased together. It was a stunning modern house nestled in a quiet, heavily wooded neighborhood, far away from the toxic memories of my past. The atmosphere was incredibly light, filled with the sounds of genuine laughter and clinking glasses. My brother-in-law, Jamal, was standing near the outdoor kitchen, holding a pair of stainless steel grilling tongs like a gavel. He was in the middle of telling a hilarious story about a deeply unprepared opposing counsel, his booming laugh echoing across the lawn. My sister Megan was sitting at the patio table, wiping tears of amusement from her eyes as she listened to her husband. Cole stood next to the massive grill, expertly flipping steaks while adding his own sharp, witty commentary to Jamal's story. I stood back for a moment, simply observing the people gathered in my backyard. This was what true family looked like. For so many years, I had been conditioned to believe that family was strictly defined by blood and legal marriage. I had endured the suffocating toxic dynamic of Nate and Caroline because I thought that was just what wives were supposed to do. I thought I had to endure the disrespect, the gaslighting, and the endless sacrifices to keep the family unit intact. But my brutal divorce and the explosive fallout had taught me a profound lesson. True family is not defined by biology or forced obligation. Family consists of the people who fiercely protect your peace. It is Jamal standing like a legal fortress between me and Caroline's abuse. It is Cole loving me for my brilliant mind instead of feeling threatened by it. It is my sister checking on me every single day during the darkest months of my life. These were the people who truly earned their place at my table. Cole walked over and handed me a plate of perfectly grilled food, pressing a warm kiss to my temple. "You look incredibly happy today, Amanda," he murmured softly. I smiled up at him, resting my hand against his chest. "I am exactly where I am supposed to be," I replied. As the afternoon slowly transitioned into a beautiful golden evening, the party began to wind down. Jamal and Megan moved inside the house to help clear the plates, and Cole started cleaning the outdoor kitchen. I decided to walk around to the front of the house to check the mailbox, realizing I had forgotten to grab the mail earlier that morning. The neighborhood was quiet and peaceful, the setting sun casting long, beautiful shadows across the manicured lawn. I opened the sleek metal mailbox and pulled out a thick stack of envelopes. Most of it was standard junk mail, a few medical journals for Cole, and some utility bills. But as I flipped through the stack, my hand suddenly stopped moving. Buried near the bottom of the pile was a cheap beige envelope. The paper felt rough and heavily textured. I stared at the top left corner of the envelope, my heart giving a strange, heavy thump. Stamped in stark, bold black ink was the official seal of the United States Federal Bureau of Prisons. I looked down at the center of the envelope. The address was written in messy, frantic handwriting. It was Nate. He had somehow managed to get my new residential address. I turned the envelope over, running my thumb across the sealed flap. Through the thin, cheap paper, I could faintly see the dark ink of a heavily written letter inside. It was a massive, desperate letter from a federal prison cell, begging me for the one thing I had explicitly promised I would never give him: forgiveness. Forgiveness. I stared at the word written in his frantic, messy handwriting across the top of the cheap prison stationery. He had filled 4 entire pages, front and back, with desperate apologies, pathetic excuses, and wild promises of complete rehabilitation. He wrote about how much he missed his beautiful wife, how the cold reality of his tiny concrete cell had finally shown him the massive error of his ways, and how he prayed every single night that I would find it in my heart to visit him just once. He wanted absolution. He wanted the woman he had relentlessly emotionally abused and financially betrayed to grant him a clean conscience so he could sleep better on his thin prison mattress. I did not even bother to read past the second paragraph. I simply folded the heavy pages back together and walked calmly across the darkening lawn toward the massive stone fire pit Cole had built on the edge of the patio. I picked up a long silver lighter from the outdoor kitchen counter. Society places a massive, crushing burden on women to constantly be the bigger person. We are relentlessly conditioned from a very young age to forgive toxic family members, to gracefully accept the half-hearted apologies of cheating spouses, and to preserve the fragile illusion of peace at the massive expense of our own mental health. We are told that holding on to anger is toxic, that cutting off blood relatives is extreme, and that true strength lies in boundless, unconditional forgiveness. But that is an absolute lie designed entirely to keep victims securely trapped in a cycle of abuse. True strength is recognizing that some people are simply malignant tumors, and the only cure is a complete, irreversible, surgical excision. Rejecting the intense societal pressure to forgive your abusers is the absolute ultimate form of personal freedom. I flicked the silver lighter, the bright orange flame catching instantly against the evening breeze. I touched the fire to the corner of Nate's desperate letter and dropped it into the dry kindling of the fire pit. I stood there and watched the flames consume his pathetic words, turning his apologies into nothing but fragile, floating gray ash. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt. I felt completely, utterly invincible. I walked back toward my beautiful new home, the warm light pouring from the large glass windows. I looked at the incredible life I had built, and I realized exactly how I had achieved it. I did not win by playing the emotional games they desperately wanted me to play. When Nate betrayed me and Caroline aggressively backed him up, they fully expected me to fall apart. They wanted me to scream, to cry, to send unhinged text messages in the middle of the night, and to beg for my marriage back. They wanted to comfortably paint me as the crazy, hysterical ex-wife so they could effortlessly justify their own horrific behavior. But I completely refused to give them that satisfaction. Instead of weaponizing my pain, I weaponized my intellect. I took all of my grief, my profound anger, and my shattered trust, and I aggressively channeled it entirely into cold, hard data. While Amber was busy decorating her stolen Bellevue mansion, and Nate was arrogantly bragging about his fake executive bonuses, I was meticulously tracing routing numbers, analyzing corporate tax structures, and legally purchasing the subprime debt portfolio that would ultimately destroy them. Emotion makes you sloppy. Intellect makes you absolutely lethal. The exact financial freedom I achieved was staggering. By legally foreclosing on the massive property Nate bought with embezzled corporate funds and selling it to a commercial developer, I secured a multi-million-dollar profit that completely insulated my future. I no longer had to worry about toxic spouses hiding assets or manipulative mother-in-laws using their wealth to assert dominance. I owned my life completely. I was the primary creditor of my own existence. But the emotional freedom was even more valuable than the massive influx of cash. I was no longer chained to a man who constantly needed to diminish my incredible career just to feel adequately masculine. I was no longer desperately seeking the impossible approval of a family that was fundamentally incapable of genuine love. I had meticulously audited my entire life, completely identified the massive liabilities, and ruthlessly cut them out of my portfolio. And now I am looking directly at you. Yes, exactly you, the specific person watching this video right now. I know exactly why you clicked on this story. I know there is a very high probability that you are currently sitting in your living room, or driving your car, or holding your phone in the dark, wondering if you are simply demanding too much from the people around you. You are exhausted from constantly making excuses for a partner who constantly belittles your massive achievements. You are completely drained from walking on eggshells around toxic family members who only ever call when they desperately need money or a convenient scapegoat. You have been repeatedly told that you are too sensitive, that you expect too much, and that you should just be grateful for whatever tiny crumbs of affection they are willing to throw your way. But I need you to listen to me very carefully right now. Your incredible value is not determined by the deeply flawed people who are entirely incapable of recognizing it. Are you going to spend the rest of your one precious life setting yourself completely on fire just to keep toxic people warm? Or are you finally going to recognize your own massive worth, weaponize your own brilliance, and ruthlessly cut the dead weight before it drags you completely under? Because the ultimate power always belongs to the one person who refuses to play the victim. And it is never too late to start demanding the absolute best for yourself. Take complete control of your own personal narrative starting right now. Today, as I walked back into my warm, brilliantly lit home, I realized the most profound truth about revenge. When people completely shatter your trust, the immediate instinct is usually a desperate desire to make them feel the exact same agonizing pain they inflicted on you. You want to scream, to tear their lives apart, and to watch them suffer in real time. But the absolute sweetest revenge does not require you to lower yourself to their miserable level. The most devastating, undeniable revenge you can ever inflict upon a narcissist is simply living an extraordinarily beautiful life, completely without them. Over the next several years, my independent forensic accounting firm exploded in massive growth. The multi-million-dollar profit from the demolition and sale of the Bellevue estate gave me the exact capital I needed to hire a team of the sharpest financial minds in the Pacific Northwest. I was no longer just a lead auditor. I was the founder and chief executive officer of my own highly respected corporate investigation agency. Major federal agencies and massive global logistics companies now actively seek out my specific expertise. When arrogant men try to hide stolen money in complicated shell companies, my firm is the one they are terrified to see walking through their heavy mahogany boardroom doors. I built an absolute empire directly on top of the shattered foundation of Nate's pathetic lies. Every single time I sign a massive new corporate contract, every time I stand in front of a federal judge as an expert witness, I am quietly reminded of the day I stood in that hospital lobby. I remember the absolute terror in Amber's eyes when she realized she could not manipulate her way out of federal fraud. I remember the crushing defeat on Nate's face when his mother walked away from him. Those memories do not bring me pain anymore. They just serve as a powerful reminder of my own incredible resilience. And in my personal life, I finally experienced the profound peace of a genuine equal partnership. Cole and I did not need to parade a fake, perfect reality on social media to prove our worth to strangers. We spent our weekends traveling the world, laughing over quiet dinners in our sunlit kitchen, and fiercely supporting each other through every major career milestone. He never once felt threatened by my ambition. Instead, he celebrated every single victory, proudly sitting in the front row when I was awarded a national commendation for my work in exposing federal corporate fraud. I never had to shrink my personality, lower my voice, or hide my intelligence to make him feel adequate. He loved the powerful woman I had become. There are absolutely no lingering regrets holding me back. I never look over my shoulder wondering what could have been. I know exactly where my abusers ended up, completely trapped in the miserable cages they built with their own bare hands. Nate will spend the rest of his youth wearing a bright orange jumpsuit, known only by a federal inmate number, stripped of all the fake prestige he so desperately craved. Amber will spend decades paying off a massive restitution debt, completely isolated from the wealthy society she tried to steal her way into. And Caroline will spend her final years in a tiny, sterile room, entirely forgotten by the golden sun she blindly enabled. Their spectacular downfall was not a tragic accident. It was the direct, unavoidable consequence of their massive arrogance and endless greed. I did not have to lift a single finger to destroy them. I just meticulously exposed the absolute truth. And the truth aggressively burned their fake empire completely to the ground. They are absolutely nothing to me now. They are just a brief, dark chapter in a book that is otherwise filled with brilliant, unadulterated success. I survived the absolute worst betrayal imaginable. And I used it as the ultimate catalyst for my own spectacular reinvention. I learned how to aggressively protect my peace, how to establish unbreakable boundaries, and how to spot a master manipulator from a mile away. I took my broken heart and I forged it into an impenetrable suit of armor. I stopped waiting for an apology that was never going to arrive, and I gave myself the complete closure I so deeply deserved. I walked through the absolute darkest valley of my life, completely surrounded by liars and thieves, and I emerged on the other side, completely victorious. You might feel completely broken right now. You might be staring at a negative bank account balance, or crying over a partner who deeply betrayed you, or dealing with a family that actively roots for your spectacular failure. But you have a brilliant mind and an incredibly strong spirit. You have the absolute power to rewrite your entire reality whenever you choose to pick up the pen. This entire journey taught me that you cannot ever control how other people choose to treat you. You cannot force a toxic family to suddenly develop genuine empathy, and you cannot force a narcissistic partner to suddenly value your profound worth. But you maintain absolute, total control over how you choose to respond to their abuse. You can either let their incredibly toxic behavior completely destroy your fragile spirit, or you can use their betrayal as the ultimate motivation to build a life so incredibly vast and successful that they can never even hope to touch you again. I chose to build the empire. I chose to walk away from the heavy emotional baggage and embrace a life of total financial and emotional independence. The universe has an incredibly poetic way of balancing the scales. The people who desperately tried to bury me did not realize I was a seed. They thought they were stripping me of everything I valued, but they were actually clearing the toxic brush away so I could finally grow into the powerful woman I was always meant to be. I am incredibly proud of the scars I carry because they are the absolute proof that I fought the hardest battle of my life, and I completely won. Have you ever had a partner try to destroy your confidence, only for you to build an empire on their lies? Drop your stories in the comments. Like, subscribe, and never let anyone tell you your worth.